In September 2016, a 22-year-old man is pulled from the Atlantic Ocean after drifting alone in a small life raft for 8 days. He is weak, dehydrated, but alive. He tells the rescuers a simple, terrible story. He and his mother set out on a routine fishing trip from Rhode Island. Their boat took on water without warning. It sank quickly. He lost sight of his mother in the chaos. He never saw her again. The Coast Guard searched hundreds of square miles of open water. They found the life raft, found the young man, but never found his mother. Her name was Linda Carman. She was 54 years old. At first, the story drew sympathy. A mother and son on the water together, a sudden accident, a son surviving against the odds. But within weeks, the sympathy began to shift. Questions surfaced. Details did not align in the way investigators expected. And those questions did not stay confined to the ocean. They reached back 3 years to a quiet house in Windsor, Connecticut on the morning of December 20, 2013. That morning, one of John Chakalos' daughters entered his home and found him in his bed. He had been shot twice, once in the head, once in the stomach. The room showed no signs of forced entry. No items appeared to have been taken. John Chakalos, 87 years old, a successful real estate developer who had built a substantial fortune, was dead. His grandson, Nathan Carman, had been the last person known to see him alive. The two had shared dinner at a Greek restaurant the evening before. Nathan had driven his grandfather home. He had helped him inside, then he left. The Windsor Police Department opened an investigation. They interviewed family members. They examined the scene. They looked at financial records. John Chakalos had 4 daughters. He had built an estate valued in the tens of millions. He had provided significant financial support to his grandson over the years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, structured through accounts and trusts. Those funds became part of the questions. No arrests were made. No charges were filed. The case remained open. It remains open to this day. 3 years passed between the shooting in Connecticut and the boat sinking off the coast of Rhode Island. In that time, the family continued to navigate the probate process. Linda Carman, Nathan's mother, stood to inherit a portion of her father's estate. Nathan, as her only child, would eventually stand to inherit from her. The connections between money, family, and loss began to draw attention from federal authorities. In May 2022, Nathan Carman was indicted in federal court. The charges included murder on the high seas in connection with his mother's death. They also included multiple counts of mail and wire fraud related to inheritance and insurance matters. Prosecutors alleged that the boat had been intentionally taken out of service, that the sinking had been planned, that the events tied back to the desire for access to family wealth. Nathan pleaded not guilty. He maintained that the sinking was an accident. He maintained that he had no involvement in his grandfather's death. He pointed to his diagnosis of autism in childhood, explaining that his communication style and demeanor were often misunderstood. His defense prepared to argue that suspicions had been built on assumptions rather than conclusive evidence. The trial was scheduled for October 2023. But on June 15, 2023, while held in a federal detention center awaiting that trial, Nathan Carman died by suicide in his cell. He was 29 years old. An autopsy confirmed the cause of death. All criminal charges against him were dismissed posthumously. The federal investigation into Linda Carman's death was closed. John Chakalos' homicide, however, has never been closed. The Windsor Police Department still lists it as an active, unsolved case. This is the story of 3 people whose lives became intertwined with love, money, and tragedy. John Chakalos, the grandfather who built a fortune and supported his family in ways both generous and complicated. Linda Carman, the mother who raised her only child, who worried about him, who went fishing with him that September day. Nathan Carman, the grandson and son whose survival at sea drew the world's attention, whose life ended before any court could hear the full evidence on either side. A close-knit family fractured by suspicion. Millions in inheritance that became a point of contention. A shooting in a quiet home. A boat that disappeared beneath the waves. A young man who waited years for his day in court, only to leave the questions behind forever. These events do not offer simple answers. They leave gaps that families and investigators continue to carry. And yet the story endures because when a family loses 3 generations in such different, devastating ways, the questions do not fade easily. This is the story of Nathan Carman, Linda Carman, and John Chakalos, a saga of loss, inheritance, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. John Chakalos arrived in this country as a young man from Greece. He carried with him the determination that many immigrants bring, the belief that hard work and careful planning could build something lasting. In Connecticut, he turned that belief into reality. He became a successful real estate developer, acquiring properties, managing developments, growing his holdings over decades. By the time he reached his later years, his estate was valued somewhere between $42 and $50 million. It included homes, commercial buildings, investments, the kind of wealth that provides security for generations. John was known in his community as a man who gave generously. He supported his family in substantial ways. He provided for his 4 daughters. He helped with homes, with education, with daily needs. But generosity, when it comes in large amounts, can sometimes carry complexity. Some family members described him as controlling at times, someone who wanted to direct how his support was used, how decisions were made. Others saw his involvement as protective, as a father's way of ensuring his children and grandchildren were taken care of. The truth, as it often is in families, lay somewhere in between. John Chakalos was a man of strong opinions, strong loyalties, and a strong sense of responsibility for those he loved. His 4 daughters grew up in that world of abundance and expectation. Linda Carman was one of them. She had a son, Nathan, born in 1994. Nathan was her only child. His father, Clark Carman, and Linda divorced when Nathan was still young. After the divorce, Linda raised Nathan largely on her own. She worked to provide stability, to guide him through the challenges that came with his diagnosis of autism in childhood. Autism shaped Nathan's early years in important ways. He experienced the world with an intensity that others sometimes found difficult to understand. He had particular interests that held his focus for long periods. He preferred routines, clear structures. Social interactions could feel overwhelming or confusing. Yet Nathan was also capable of deep affection, of loyalty to the people closest to him. His mother, Linda, navigated this carefully. She sought out interventions and therapies when he was younger, hoping to give him tools that would help him move through life more comfortably. At the same time, she respected his need for independence, for space to be himself. Their bond was intense and complicated, the closeness that comes from years of shared challenges, mixed with the normal frictions of a mother and son figuring out how to relate as he grew into adulthood. Nathan lived somewhat apart from the wider world. He preferred quiet settings, time outdoors, activities that allowed him to focus without interruption. Fishing became one of those activities. He enjoyed being on the water, the rhythm of casting a line, the patience required.
It was something he and his mother sometimes shared. They would plan trips together, even if Linda herself was not entirely comfortable on boats. John Chakalos watched his grandson grow. He took a special interest in Nathan. Over the years, he provided substantial financial support, hundreds of thousands of dollars in total. At times, the support amounted to around $100,000 annually. The money came through structured accounts, trusts, and gifts. John wanted Nathan to have resources, to have options. He believed his grandson deserved the security that came with financial independence. This level of support did not go unnoticed within the family. John's daughters had their own needs, their own children, their own perspectives on how the estate should be handled. Some felt the favoritism toward Nathan was uneven. Others worried that the large gifts could create imbalances or misunderstandings. Conversations about money, about who received what and why, created strain. Holidays could carry an undercurrent of tension, love mixed with questions about fairness, about control, about how best to care for everyone involved. Linda, as Nathan's mother, stood in the middle of this. She appreciated her father's generosity toward her son. At the same time, she had to manage the day-to-day realities of raising Nathan, his therapies, his education, his emotional needs. She worried about how the financial support might affect his sense of responsibility, how it might influence the way others viewed him. She worried about her own place in the family estate, about what would happen when her father was no longer there to mediate. These tensions were not constant explosions. They were quieter, moments of discussion, moments of concern, moments when family members chose their words carefully. Yet they were real. Money, when it is tied to love and legacy, can pull people in different directions. The Chakalos family was tight-knit in many ways. Holidays shared, memories held in common, a sense of connection that ran deep. But tightness can also mean that every shift in support, every decision about inheritance is felt more acutely. Nathan, as he entered his 20s, continued to live somewhat isolated life. He spent time in Vermont, away from the Connecticut family center. He maintained contact with his mother, with his grandfather. He received the ongoing financial help that John provided. He pursued his interests, including fishing. He did not have a large circle of friends or a public-facing career. His world was smaller, more contained, and that containment sometimes made the larger family dynamics feel even more present. Through all of this, Linda remained the steady presence in Nathan's life. She checked in regularly. She offered guidance. She worried, as mothers do. She hoped that the resources her grandfather provided would give him a foundation, a way to build his own future. John Chakalos, in his late 80s, continued to oversee his properties, his investments, his family. He remained the central figure, the one who had built the wealth, the one who decided how it flowed. His 4 daughters and grandson all looked to him in different ways, some with gratitude, some with frustration, some with both. This was the foundation of the family before December 2013, a blend of love, support, and the quiet strains that come when large amounts of money are part of the conversation. A grandfather who gave generously but expected influence. A mother who balanced care for her son with the realities of family expectations. A young man who received much, but whose life was shaped by circumstances he did not choose. It was a family bound together by history, by shared blood, by shared resources. It was also a family where every decision carried weight. But in December 2013, this family faced its first unimaginable loss. On the evening of December 19, 2013, Nathan Carman met his grandfather, John Chakalos, for dinner at a Greek restaurant in the Hartford area. It was a place they had gone to before, simple, familiar, the kind of spot where family conversations could unfold over plates of traditional food. Nathan and John spent time together there, talking as grandfather and grandson often do. After the meal, Nathan drove John back to his home in Windsor, Connecticut. He helped his grandfather inside the house. He made sure John was settled. Then Nathan left. That was the last time anyone outside the home saw John Chakalos alive. The next morning, December 20th, one of John's daughters, Elaine, arrived at the house. She entered and found her father in his bed. He had been shot twice. One wound was to the head, the other was to the stomach. The scene showed no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged doors, no evidence that someone had broken in from outside. Nothing appeared to have been taken. No valuables were missing. No drawers had been rifled through. The house remained orderly in every other way. The Windsor Police Department responded immediately. Officers secured the scene. They began collecting evidence. They interviewed family members who had keys or regular access. They spoke with neighbors. They reviewed any available security footage from nearby properties. The medical examiner confirmed the cause of death as multiple gunshot wounds. The case was classified as a homicide. Early in the investigation, several details drew attention. Nathan had been the last person known to have seen John alive. He had spent the evening with him. He had driven him home. He had been inside the house that night. Investigators asked Nathan about his movements after leaving. They asked about his whereabouts in the hours that followed. They asked about the dinner conversation, about anything unusual. Nathan told them he had gone home after dropping his grandfather off. He provided an account of his evening and the following morning. Elements of his timeline were noted and compared against other information. Another point that came under scrutiny was a firearm Nathan had purchased weeks earlier. It was a Sig Sauer rifle, a model that used a caliber consistent with the bullets recovered from the scene. Nathan explained that he had bought the rifle for target shooting or hunting purposes. He said it had been misplaced or lost sometime after the purchase. He reported it missing to authorities at the time. Investigators examined this detail carefully: the timing of the purchase, the reported loss, whether the weapon could have been recovered or traced. No firearm was ever located in connection with the case. The absence of forced entry led investigators to consider that the shooter was someone John knew, someone who had access, someone he might have let in or who already had a way inside. Personal motive became a focus. John Chakalos had built significant wealth through real estate. His estate included properties, accounts, trusts, and other assets valued in the tens of millions. He had structured portions of that wealth for his daughters and grandson. Some funds were in trusts or accounts that could pass directly upon his death. Nathan had already received substantial support from his grandfather, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. The possibility that financial considerations played a role was examined. Family members were asked about the estate, about discussions of inheritance, about any recent changes to wills or trusts. Suspicions within the family surfaced early. Some relatives questioned Nathan's involvement. They pointed to the financial support he had received. They pointed to the timing of the rifle purchase. They pointed to his presence the night before. These were not accusations made lightly. They came from grief, from shock, from the need to understand why someone they loved had been taken in such a way. Other family members defended Nathan. They emphasized his bond with his grandfather. They noted the lack of any direct evidence linking him to the act. The Windsor Police Department conducted a thorough investigation. They followed leads. They interviewed extensively. They reviewed financial records. They examined phone records and travel patterns where possible. Despite these efforts, no conclusive evidence emerged that allowed charges to be filed against Nathan or anyone else. There were gaps, elements of alibi that could not be fully disproven or confirmed, the absence of the weapon, the lack of physical evidence tying a specific person to the scene. No arrests were made. The case remained open. As of the most recent public reports, it continues to be an active, unsolved homicide with the Windsor Police Department. The impact on the family was profound and immediate. Grief settled over them in layers. John Chakalos had been the patriarch, the one who had built the family's security, who had guided decisions, who had been a constant presence. His sudden, violent death left a void that could not be filled. His daughters mourned their father. They mourned the way he had been taken. They mourned the questions that followed. With John's passing, the estate process began in earnest. Probate proceedings started in Connecticut courts. Assets were inventoried. Trusts were examined. Disputes arose over distributions, over what John had intended, over how funds should be allocated. Nathan, as John's grandson and Linda's son, received certain funds from accounts that had been set up for him, specifically during John's lifetime. These transfers continued as part of the estate administration. The money provided some measure of support, but it also became part of the family's ongoing conversations that carried the weight of loss and the strain of differing views on fairness. 3 years passed. The Windsor homicide remained unsolved. The family continued to live with the unresolved nature of it. They marked anniversaries quietly. They remembered John in their own ways. They navigated the probate matters that stretched on. Nathan, in Vermont, kept to his routines. He stayed in touch with his mother. He pursued his interests, including time on the water. The events of December 2013 did not disappear from his life or from the family's. They remained part of the background, a wound that had not healed, a question that had not been answered.
3 years later, another tragedy at sea would bring these suspicions roaring back. On September 17, 2016, Nathan Carman, now 22 years old, and his mother, Linda Carman, 54, left Ram Point Marina in Narragansett, Rhode Island. They boarded Nathan's boat, a 31-foot fishing vessel named the Chicken Pox. The plan was straightforward, a routine day of fishing in nearby waters. They would cast lines, spend time together on the open sea, return by evening. Linda had always been uneasy about being on the water. She did not enjoy boats the way her son did. The motion, the vastness, the unpredictability of the ocean made her uncomfortable. Yet she went that day. She went because she wanted to share something important with Nathan. She wanted to strengthen their connection, to spend hours side by side doing something he loved. It was an act of love, quiet and deliberate. They departed in the morning under clear skies. The Chicken Pox was a boat Nathan had owned for some time. He had made modifications to it over the years, repairs, upgrades, changes to suit his needs as someone who spent considerable time on the water alone. Those modifications would later become part of the questions that followed. By the end of the day, neither Nathan nor Linda had returned to the marina. Family members grew concerned. Calls were made. The Coast Guard was notified. A search began almost immediately. Vessels and aircraft covered a wide area off the Rhode Island coast. They searched through the night and into the following days. The ocean is vast. Currents move quickly. Weather can change without warning. The search teams expanded their grid, following possible drift patterns, hoping to find any sign of the boat or the people aboard. On September 25th, 8 days after they had left the marina, a freighter spotted a small life raft drifting far offshore. Nathan Carman was inside. He was alive, though weakened by exposure, dehydration, and lack of food. Rescuers brought him aboard. He received medical attention. He told them what had happened. He said the Chicken Pox had begun taking on water unexpectedly. The bilge pumps failed to keep up. The boat sank rapidly. In the confusion, he lost sight of his mother. He managed to deploy the life raft. He climbed in alone. He drifted for 8 days, using what little supplies he had, waiting for rescue. The news spread quickly.
A young man survives 8 days adrift at sea. His mother is missing. Initial reaction was of sympathy. People imagined the terror of watching a boat sink, the desperation of losing a parent in the waves, the endurance required to stay alive in a small raft with no land in sight. Media outlets carried the story. Rescue footage showed Nathan being helped from the raft. He appeared calm, perhaps too calm for some observers. His physical condition after 8 days without substantial food or shelter raised eyebrows. He was thin, yes, but not as gaunt as some expected. His demeanor in early interviews was composed. He answered questions directly. He repeated the same account: sudden sinking, separation from his mother, survival by rationing what he had. The Coast Guard continued searching for Linda Carman and any debris from the chicken pox. They found nothing. No body, no significant wreckage, no life jacket or personal items that could confirm the location of the sinking. After an extended effort, the active search was scaled back. Linda was listed as missing, presumed lost at sea. She would later be declared legally dead in 2023. As days turned to weeks, the public mood shifted. Sympathy gave way to scrutiny. Questions began to accumulate. Why had the boat sunk so quickly? What caused the water intake? Nathan had made modifications to the vessel in the months before the trip, changes he described as routine maintenance or improvements. Investigators examined the boat's history. They looked at photographs and records of those modifications. Some reports suggested holes had been drilled or repairs made in ways that could have compromised the hull's integrity. Nathan maintained that any changes were intended to make the boat safer or more functional for his use, as someone who spent considerable time on the water alone. No conclusive proof emerged that the modifications were deliberately designed to cause a sinking. An insurance claim was filed for the loss of the chicken pox. The amount was approximately $85,000. That claim drew attention because of the timing and the amount. It also connected back to the financial threads that had begun to surface after John Chakalos' death 3 years earlier. Nathan had been receiving support from his grandfather's estate. Linda, as one of John's daughters, had an interest in the remaining assets. If Linda were no longer alive, certain distributions could shift. Nathan, as her only heir, stood to benefit indirectly. These financial ties became part of the broader review. Federal authorities, already aware of the open homicide case in Windsor, began looking more closely. They examined the sequence of events. They reviewed communications between Nathan and Linda in the days leading up to the trip. They looked at the boat's maintenance logs, purchase records, and any insurance documents. They interviewed family members again. They re-examined financial transfers from John's estate. The questions were not confined to the ocean anymore. They reached back to the night of December 19, 2013, when Nathan had dinner with his grandfather and helped him home. The investigation deepened. It moved from a straightforward missing person and vessel loss case to one that carried layers of complexity. The Coast Guard's report on the sinking remained inconclusive, no definitive cause identified beyond the account Nathan provided. But the absence of Linda's body, the condition of the life raft, Nathan's composure, the insurance claim, the modifications to the boat, and the unresolved estate matters all contributed to growing doubt in some quarters. Nathan continued to assert that everything had been an accident. He said he had done everything he could to save his mother. He said the loss devastated him. He pointed to his autism diagnosis, explaining that his way of expressing emotion might not match what others expected in such circumstances. His father, Clark Carman, and some supporters stood by him. They emphasized the bond between mother and son. They emphasized the tragedy of losing Linda under any circumstances. Yet the scrutiny persisted. Public discussion grew. Media coverage expanded. The story of the young man who survived 8 days adrift became intertwined with the story of the grandfather who had been shot in his bed 3 years earlier. 2 tragedies, 2 families waiting for answers, one person at the center of both. What began as a missing person and vessel loss case soon intertwined with the grandfather's unsolved murder.
By May of 2022, More than 5 years had passed since the Chicken Pox sank off the coast of Rhode Island. The Coast Guard had long since concluded their search for Linda Carman. The Windsor Police Department continued to list John Chakalos' homicide as an active investigation, but no new developments had brought resolution. The family had lived with the weight of those losses. The grandfather gone in his home, the mother lost at sea. Nathan Carman, now in his late 20s, had returned to his life in Vermont. He had filed the insurance claim for the boat. He had continued to receive certain funds from his grandfather's estate. He had maintained contact with his father, Clark Carman. But the questions that had arisen after the sinking did not fade. They grew. Federal authorities, including the U.S. Attorney's Office in Vermont and Rhode Island, had been reviewing the case for years. They had gathered records. They had interviewed family members multiple times. They had examined financial documents, boat maintenance logs, communications between Nathan and Linda. They had looked back at the 2013 homicide in Windsor. On May 10, 2022, a federal grand jury returned an indictment against Nathan Carman. The charges were serious and multifaceted. First, there was one count of murder on the high seas in connection with Linda Carman's death. This charge stemmed from the allegation that Nathan had intentionally caused the sinking of the Chicken Pox while in international waters, leading to his mother's death. Prosecutors alleged that the boat had not sunk by accident. They claimed that modifications made to the vessel, holes drilled, repairs done in specific ways, were deliberate steps to ensure it would take on water and go down. They pointed to Nathan's knowledge of boats, his preparations for the trip, his survival in the life raft with supplies that allowed him to endure 8 days. They argued that Linda's nervousness about the water made her unlikely participant in any extended voyage, suggesting the trip had been planned with a different outcome in mind. Alongside the murder charge, there were 7 counts of mail and wire fraud. These related to an alleged scheme involving inheritance and insurance. Prosecutors claimed that Nathan had submitted false claims and statements to access funds from his grandfather's estate and from the boat's insurance policy. They tied these actions back to a larger plot. They alleged that Nathan had shot his grandfather in 2013 as part of an effort to gain control over portions of the family fortune. They pointed to the financial support Nathan had received from John, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and suggested that the desire for more had motivated the actions. With John gone, certain trusts and accounts could be accessed differently. With Linda gone, Nathan, as her only heir, would stand to inherit her share. These indictments presented this as a sequence of calculated steps toward securing the family fortune. Nathan was arrested shortly after the indictment. He appeared in federal court in Burlington, Vermont. He entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. His defense team began preparing their case immediately. Nathan maintained his innocence from the start. He repeated that the sinking of the Chicken Pox had been a tragic accident. He said the boat had taken on water without warning. He said he had done everything possible to save his mother, but had been separated in the confusion. He denied any involvement in his grandfather's death. He said the dinner on December 19, 2013 was a normal evening. He said he had left John safe in his home. He said the rifle he had purchased was unrelated and had simply been misplaced. A key part of Nathan's defense centered on his diagnosis of autism. His legal team argued that his behavior and communication style had been misinterpreted. They explained that people with autism sometimes express emotions differently, appearing calm or detached in situations where others might show more visible distress.
They said Nathan's composure after the rescue, his direct answers in interviews, were consistent with how he processed stress and grief. They suggested that suspicions had built on these misunderstandings rather than on solid evidence. They pointed to the physical proof: no body for Linda, no weapon recovered for John's shooting, no witnesses to either event. They emphasized that the Coast Guard report had not concluded foul play in the sinking. They argued that the financial motives alleged by prosecutors were assumptions, not facts. The indictment divided the family further. Some relatives, including Nathan's aunts, John's other daughters, filed legal documents known as slayer petitions in probate court. These petitions sought to block Nathan from receiving any inheritance from John's or Linda's estates. Under slayer statutes, a person who is found to have unlawfully caused another's death cannot benefit financially from that death. The aunts argued that Nathan's alleged actions disqualified him. They expressed their belief that he had been involved in both losses. They wanted to protect the estate distributions as they believed their father would have intended. On the other side, Nathan's father, Clark Carman, defended him publicly and privately. Clark spoke about Nathan's character. He described him as a young man who loved his mother deeply. He said the accusations did not match the son he knew. He supported Nathan's plea of not guilty. He stood by him through the legal proceedings. Other supporters, including some friends and experts familiar with autism, echoed these sentiments. They emphasized the human side, a young man facing immense loss, then facing charges based on what they saw as circumstantial evidence. The probate process for John's estate, which had begun after his death in 2013, continued to unfold slowly. With Linda's death in 2016, her estate became part of the proceedings as well. The sisters, John's remaining daughters, contested various aspects. They challenged distributions. They reviewed trusts. They sought clarity on what portions were intended for whom. The courts in Connecticut handled these matters step by step. Documents were filed. Hearings were held. The process stretched on for years, even after the federal indictment. As of the most recent reports, elements of both estates remain unresolved. The legal battles over inheritance added another layer of strain to a family already carrying so much. In the courtroom, sketches captured the scenes. Nathan seated at the defense table, attorneys presenting arguments, judges overseeing the proceedings. Document excerpts, redacted for privacy, were shared in media reports. Pages from the indictment, quotes from motions, summaries of financial records. These visuals, presented respectfully, showed the formal side of the case, the structure of law applied to deeply personal losses. The trial was scheduled for October 2023. Prosecutors prepared their evidence, timelines, financial charts, expert testimonies on boat mechanics and ballistics. The defense readied their responses, witnesses on Nathan's character, experts on autism, challenges to the physical evidence. The family braced for what the proceedings might bring, testimonies that would revisit the dinner in 2013, the fishing trip in 2016, the money that connected them all. But before the trial could reveal the truth.
On June 15, 2023, Nathan Carman died in his cell at the Federal Detention Center where he had been held since his arrest the previous year. He was 29 years old. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy and ruled the cause of death as suicide. The manner was determined to be non-suspicious, meaning there were no indications of foul play or external involvement. Authorities found a note in his possession. The note addressed aspects of the case itself, his perspective on the charges, his insistence on innocence, his feelings about the process,
but it was not written as a suicide note. It did not contain any explicit intent to end his life. The investigation into his death confirmed that it was self-inflicted. No further criminal inquiry was opened regarding the circumstances in the cell. News of Nathan's death spread quickly through the family, through the legal teams on both sides, through the media that had followed the story for years. The federal charges, murder on the high seas, mail and wire fraud, were dismissed posthumously. There would be no trial in October 2023. No witnesses would be called to testify. No jury would hear the evidence prosecutors had prepared or the defenses Nathan's attorneys had built. The case against him ended that day. The investigation into Linda Carman's death, which had centered on the allegation that the sinking of the Chicken Pox was intentional, was formally closed. Linda had already been declared legally dead in 2023, allowing probate and estate matters to proceed under that status. With Nathan gone, the criminal thread that tied the two tragedies together dissolved. John Chakalos's homicide in Windsor, Connecticut, however, remained untouched by this closure. The Windsor Police Department continued to list it as an active, unsolved case. No new leads had emerged in the years since 2013. No weapon had been recovered. No suspect had been charged. The file stayed open, a quiet reminder that one part of this family's story still waited for resolution. The end came without the courtroom confrontation many had anticipated. There would be no public presentation of ballistics reports, no cross-examination of witnesses about the dinner on December 19, 2013, no expert testimony on boat hull integrity or life raft survival odds. The questions that had lingered for nearly a decade about the shooting in Windsor, about the sinking off Rhode Island, did not receive definitive answers in a legal setting. Instead, the story concluded in silence in a detention center cell with a young man who had spent years under suspicion and scrutiny no longer present to respond. For the family, this was a bittersweet and painful close. They had already lost John Chakalos to violence in his own home. They had lost Linda to the ocean. Now they lost Nathan, the grandson and son who had been at the center of so much attention and division. Grief compounded upon grief. Some relatives mourned Nathan as they would any family member taken too soon, acknowledging the tragedy of a life ended at 29 before he could grow older, before he could live beyond the shadow of accusation. Others carried the unresolved suspicions that had divided them for so long. The absence of a trial meant no final reckoning, no moment when evidence could be weighed publicly and a clear verdict reached. The family was left to process their losses privately, in fragments, amid the ongoing probate proceedings that still governed the estates of John and Linda. Discussions about Nathan's autism took on renewed importance in the aftermath. His legal team had argued that his diagnosis explained much of what others had found unusual: his calm demeanor after the rescue, his direct and sometimes flat way of speaking in interviews, his difficulty expressing emotion in ways that matched societal expectations. In the wake of his death, some who had followed the case reflected on how those traits had been interpreted. What one person saw as composure under pressure, another saw as detachment. What one viewed as straightforward answers, another viewed as evasion. The conversation extended beyond this single case, touching on broader questions about how autism is understood in high-stress situations, in legal settings, in public scrutiny. Experts and advocates noted that individuals on the spectrum may process and display grief differently, that their responses do not always align with neurotypical norms. These reflections did not resolve the suspicions held by some family members or investigators. They did, however, add a layer of nuance to how the story had been perceived. The estates of John Chakalos and Linda Carman continued through probate courts. Sisters, John's remaining daughters, still contested distributions in some areas. Certain trusts and accounts required final rulings. Nathan's death altered the line of inheritance in practical ways, removing one potential heir and shifting focus back to the surviving relatives. The money that once had been a source of support, then of tension, then of accusation, now became part of a quieter administrative process. The legal battles over assets moved forward without the criminal overlay that had dominated headlines for years. Visually, the timeline of these events can be laid out plainly. December 2013, the shooting in Windsor. September 2016, the fishing trip and sinking. May 2022, the federal indictment. June 2023, Nathan's death and the dismissal of charges. 2023 onward, the ongoing probate, the open homicide file in Windsor. Respectful images of the family in earlier, happier times appear sparingly. Archival photographs that show John with his daughters, Linda with her young son, moments captured before the losses accumulated. These visuals serve as reminders that behind every legal document, every news headline, were real people whose lives were forever altered. The end reaches its final chapter not with resolution, but with absence. No courtroom drama brought clarity. No confession or new evidence emerged to settle the questions. A young man who had survived 8 days adrift at sea did not survive the years that followed. A grandfather's homicide remains unsolved. A mother's body was never recovered. The family continues to carry what cannot be returned, loved ones gone, suspicions that linger, grief that does not neatly conclude. Yet in the quiet that follows, there is space to reflect on the human elements that endure. The love between a mother and son that led Linda to board a boat despite her fear. The generosity of a grandfather who wanted his grandson to have security. The resilience required to navigate suspicion, loss, and legal proceedings. The complexity of autism in a world that sometimes misreads difference as guilt. These threads remain even after the legal files close. The case against Nathan Carman ended with his death. The investigation into Linda's disappearance closed. But John Chakalos' murder stays open, a reminder that some answers wait longer than a lifetime.
Years have passed since the events that shaped this family's path. The shooting in Windsor on December 20th, 2013, the sinking of the Chicken Pox on September 17th, 2016, the federal indictment in May 2022, Nathan's death in June 2023. Each moment stands alone on the timeline, yet they remain connected through the lives they touched and the questions they left behind. Among those questions, the most persistent is the one that has never been answered. Who took John Chakalos' life in his own bed that December night? The Windsor Police Department has kept the file active. Investigators have reviewed evidence again and again. They have followed leads when new information surfaced. Yet no suspect has been identified. No weapon has been recovered. No one has been charged. The case remains an open homicide, a reminder that some truths stay hidden even after more than a decade. Then there are the questions surrounding the events at sea. What exactly happened aboard the Chicken Pox on that September day? Did the boat take on water due to an unforeseen failure, as Nathan described, or were the modifications he made to the hull part of a different plan? The Coast Guard's examination found no definitive mechanical cause beyond what Nathan reported. No wreckage large enough to analyze survived. No body was recovered. The life raft carried him through 8 days, but it could not explain everything that came before or after. Those details rest in the silence of the ocean and in the memory of the one person who was there. And the larger question that tied the two tragedies together: were the financial arrangements, the gifts, the trusts, the inheritance, a motive for harm? Or were they simply the ordinary complexities of a wealthy family trying to provide for its members? Prosecutors saw a pattern. Some family members saw betrayal. Others saw misunderstandings amplified by grief and suspicion. Nathan's autism diagnosis entered those discussions repeatedly. His way of speaking, his composure, his directness, traits that some interpreted as detachment or evasion, were, according to those close to him, simply how he experienced and expressed the world. The clash between perception and reality added another layer to the unanswered parts of the story. No trial ever tested these interpretations in open court. No verdict settled the debate. The story has not faded from public view. In November 2025, Netflix released a documentary titled The Carman Family Deaths. It presented interviews, archival footage, court documents, and perspectives from family members, investigators, and experts. It allowed viewers to hear different sides, the suspicions held by some relatives, the defenses offered by others, the challenges of understanding autism in the context of tragedy. Books have revisited the events as well. One notable example is Blood in the Water by Casey Sherman, published in 2025, which explores the timeline, the financial threats, and the human elements in greater depth. ABC's 2020 aired an episode in April 2025 that revisited the case with new interviews and reflections on how the losses unfolded. These retellings keep the questions alive. They remind people that families can endure multiple devastations and still seek understanding. In honoring those at the center of this story, we remember John Chakalos as the immigrant who built a successful real estate career through determination and hard work. He was a grandfather who provided generously for his family, who believed in giving his grandson opportunities and security. His generosity was real, even when it came with expectations and complexities. We remember Linda Carman as a devoted mother who raised her only child through challenges large and small. She sought help for Nathan when he needed it. She respected his independence as he grew. She stepped onto a boat despite her fear of the water because she wanted to share in something he loved. Her decision to go fishing that day was an act of connection, of love. And we remember Nathan Carman as a young man whose life was shaped by autism, by family support, by loss upon loss. He survived 8 days alone on the ocean. He faced years of suspicion and legal pressure. His life ended at 29, before any court could hear his full account. Each of them, grandfather, mother, son, carried their own complexities, their own hopes, their own quiet struggles. Stories like this show how tragedy ripples through families in ways that last for generations. One loss leads to another. Grief compounds. Suspicions divide. Money meant to provide security can become a source of conflict. Yet the ripple also carries resilience.
Family members continue to mark birthdays, to share memories, to navigate probate courts, to live with what cannot be changed. The persistence of investigators in Windsor keeping a homicide file open, in federal offices reviewing evidence for years, matters. It shows that cold cases are not abandoned lightly. They wait for the right piece of information, the right moment, the right eyes to look again. Even when answers do not come, the effort honors those who are gone. If this story has stayed with you, if the lingering questions, the family dynamics, or the human cost have prompted thought, please share below. Leave your thoughts on this case respectfully. If you have suggestions for other real cold cases, missing person stories, or unsolved homicides we should explore, write them in the comments. Names, years, locations, whatever details you remember. Your input helps guide what we cover next. If you appreciate thoughtful true crime narration, in-depth cold case reviews, and stories told with care for the people involved, please subscribe. Turn on notifications so you do not miss future episodes. Like this video if it brought something meaningful to you. Share it with others who value respectful examinations of real events, but always with kindness and consideration for those affected. Sources for this episode include the Netflix documentary, The Carman Family Deaths, available on Tudum, ABC News archives, including the 2020 segment from April 2025, and publicly available court releases and statements from the U.S. Attorney's Office and Windsor Police Department. Full links are in the description below. We will continue to bring you these stories, not for sensationalism, but to remember the lives involved, to acknowledge the questions that remain, and to honor the persistence that keeps searching. Some mysteries close without full resolution, but the stories and the people